When I was in my senior year of college, I told a single lie that completely derailed my entire life. I was barely getting by financially working 2 part-time jobs while taking a full course load, and I was always exhausted. My roommate Olivia came from money and never had to work a day in her life. One night, she was going on about this luxury cruise her family was taking over spring break and asked what I was doing. I was actually picking up extra shifts at the diner, but I was so tired of always being the poor friend, so I made up a story about visiting my wealthy uncle in his beach house in Malibu. I described this incredible property with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private stretch of beach. I talked about the celebrity neighbors and exclusive restaurants. I never thought she'd take it any further than that conversation. A week later, Olivia burst into our apartment practically vibrating with excitement. "Guess what?" she squealed. "My parents said we can use their jet and come stay with, you at your uncle's beach house for spring break." My heart stopped before I could process what was happening. She was showing me texts from her parents and telling me she'd already invited our other roommate, Zach, and his girlfriend. They were all so excited that we'd get to spend our last college spring break together somewhere amazing, instead of at the crowded beaches with all the other students. I opened my mouth to confess. But then I saw how happy she looked, and I thought about how they'd all look at me if they knew I'd made up the whole thing because I was embarrassed about being poor, so I said, that would be amazing. I figured I'd find a way out of it later. Maybe say my uncle had an emergency or the house was damaged in a storm. But Olivia was already making plans. She started a group chat, created a shared document for packing lists, and even researched restaurants in Malibu. She wanted us to try. Every day the lie grew bigger. I started panicking. I couldn't afford to actually take them to Malibu and rent a place. And even if I could, I didn't want to waste my hard-earned money pretending to be someone I wasn't. Then 2 weeks before spring break, I got an email from my financial aid office. There was a problem with my scholarship. I wouldn't be able to register for my final quarter unless I paid $6,000 I didn't have. I was sobbing in the library when Olivia found me. She sat down and I finally broke. I confessed everything about lying about the beach house and how I was actually working at the diner over break trying to save money for school. She stared at me for what felt like forever and then slowly said, "That's it. That's what you're upset about." I was confused. She laughed and said, "I've known you were lying about that beach house since the minute you mentioned it. You've never even been to California." But when she saw my financial aid email, her expression changed. She got really quiet and then asked how much I needed. I told her, and she immediately pulled out her phone, called her dad, and right in front of me asked him to transfer $6,000 to my account. I was shocked. I started crying harder, saying I couldn't accept that she put her phone down and looked me straight in the eyes. "I know you've been working yourself to death while I've been planning luxury vacations. Please let me help you this one time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We both skipped our afternoon classes and talked for hours. She told me that her family actually owned a place in Santa Barbara, not far from Malibu, and she'd been planning to surprise me by taking me there anyway. Everything was working out until 3 days before spring break when I got another email. This one wasn't from financial aid. It was from the university's academic integrity board. Someone had reported me for cheating on my statistics final. The professor had found 2 identical wrong answers on my test, and another student's. I hadn't cheated. I'd studied for days for that exam. I showed Olivia the email, and she immediately said, "Don't worry about it. You'll explain, and they'll believe you." But I wasn't so sure. I'd heard stories about the academic board, how they could expel students even without concrete proof. I couldn't sleep that night. By morning, I was a complete wreck. I dragged myself to the meeting with the board feeling like I was walking to my execution. 5 professors sat behind a long table, all staring at me like I was already guilty. Professor Wilson, who taught the statistics class, laid out the evidence. The other student had admitted to cheating but wouldn't say who he'd copied from. The professor had already failed him, but because of the university's zero-tolerance policy on academic dishonesty, they were investigating me too. I tried to explain that I had no idea who the other student even was. I always sat in the front row and never showed my paper to anyone. Professor Wilson said the chances of 2 students making the identical unusual error on question 17 was extremely unlikely. I racked my brain trying to remember what I'd put for that question. That's when another board member, Professor Lee from the mathematics department, spoke up. She'd looked at both exams and determined that while the final answers were identical, the work shown was completely different. The other student had no work shown at all, just the wrong answer. I'd shown all my calculations and made a simple arithmetic error at the very end. I almost collapsed with relief, but just as I thought I was in the clear, Professor Wilson said he'd received an anonymous tip that I had been selling exam answers. My mouth fell open. That was absolutely not true. I later found out the other student had made up this lie to try to minimize his own punishment, hoping they'd go easier on him if he pretended he'd bought the answers instead of stealing them. The board said they'd need time to consider everything and would email me their decision. I spent the next 2 days in a constant state of anxiety. Olivia tried to reassure me it would be fine, but I could tell she was worried too. Finally, the night before we were supposed to leave for spring break, I got the email the board had found insufficient evidence of cheating, and I was cleared of all accusations. I was so relieved I actually fell to my knees in our apartment. Olivia hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. We left for Santa Barbara the next morning on her family's private jet. I'd never been on any plane before, let alone a private one. I was like a little kid pressing my face against the window and taking pictures of everything when we landed. A driver picked us up in a sleek black SUV and took us to the most beautiful house I'd ever seen. It wasn't as big as I'd imagined my fake uncle's place to be, but it was still incredible. Right on the beach with a huge deck and floor-to-ceiling windows. Zach and his girlfriend arrived a few hours later, and for the first 3 days, everything was perfect. We swam in the ocean, ate at amazing restaurants, and stayed up late drinking wine around a fire pit on the beach. I kept thinking how close I'd come to missing all of this, both because of my lie and the cheating accusation. On the 4th day, we went to a beach club that Olivia's family belonged to. It was the kind of place where celebrities hang out but don't get bothered. We were sitting at our cabana when I noticed a man at the bar staring at me. At first, I thought maybe he was looking at Olivia or Zach's girlfriend because they were both gorgeous, but when I got up to go to the bathroom, he followed me. "Hey," he said, blocking my path. "Don't I know you from somewhere? I'd never seen him before in my life." I told him he must be mistaking me for someone else. He kept insisting, narrowing his eyes like he was trying to place me. Then he snapped his fingers and said, "I know. You're Ryan's niece, right?" My heart sank. Ryan was the name I'd made up for my fake Malibu uncle. No, I said, trying to stay calm. "I don't have an uncle named Ryan." Now, this guy was looking at me suspiciously. "I'm sure you are," he said. "Ryan showed me pictures of his niece, and she looks just like you." I shook my head and quickly walked away. When I got back to our table, I was shaking. Olivia noticed immediately and asked what was wrong. I told her about the strange man, and she frowned. "That's weird," she said. "Maybe he's confusing you with someone." I nodded but couldn't shake the uneasiness. An hour later, we were about to leave when the man appeared again, this time with another older guy. They walked straight to our table, the younger man pointing at me saying, "See, I told you, it was her." Olivia stood up immediately, putting herself between me and the men. "Can we help you?" she asked in the cold voice I'd heard her use when guys got too pushy at bars. The older man smiled apologetically. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said. "My friend here thought he recognized your friend as my niece, but I can see now he was mistaken." I exhaled with relief, but then the man added, "Please forgive the confusion. I'm Ryan Sullivan. My fake uncle's fake full name. It was such a bizarre coincidence." I almost laughed. But then Ryan Sullivan said something that made my blood freeze. "I do have a beach house in Malibu, though, and my niece looks remarkably like your friend. She's staying with me for spring break." Olivia turned to look at me, her eyebrows raised. I could see the wheels turning in her head before she could say anything. I grabbed her arm and said we should go. We're going to be late for our dinner reservation. We gathered our things quickly and left, neither of us speaking until we were back in the car, so that was bizarre. Olivia finally said, "What are the odds there's actually a Ryan with a beach house in Malibu and a niece who looks like you?" "I know," I said. "Crazy coincidence." She gave me a strange look, but let it drop that night at dinner. Zach brought up the weird encounter, joking that maybe I had a secret twin. I laughed along, but I couldn't stop. Thinking about it, it was too weird. The next morning, Olivia was scrolling through her phone at breakfast when she suddenly gasped. "What's wrong?" I asked. She turned the phone toward me. It was an Instagram profile for someone named Megan Sullivan. The girl in the photos looked eerily similar to me. Same dark hair, same smile, even the same small mole near her left eyebrow. Olivia had somehow found Ryan Sullivan online and then found his niece through his tagged photos. I stared at the pictures in shock. She was at a beach house that looked exactly like the one I'd described when I made up my lie. "How is this possible?" I whispered. Olivia looked as freaked out as I felt. "I don't know," she said, "but it's super creepy." We showed Zach and his girlfriend when they came down for breakfast, and they agreed it was weird. We tried to shake it off and enjoy the rest of our day, but I kept checking Megan Sullivan's Instagram page. She was posting stories from her uncle's Malibu house. At one point, she was at the same restaurant we'd gone to the night before. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could I have made up a person who actually existed that evening? We decided to drive to Malibu for dinner. Olivia suggested we could try to casually drive by Ryan Sullivan's house. I knew we should let it go, but curiosity got the better of me. We found the address from a caption on one of Megan's photos and typed it into the GPS. When we pulled up to the house, my jaw dropped. It was exactly how I'd pictured it. Exactly how I'd described it to Olivia that night in our apartment. We sat in the car staring at the house for a long minute, none of us saying anything. That's when someone knocked on the driver's window. It was Ryan Sullivan. "I thought that was you," he said when Olivia rolled down the window. "Is everything okay, Olivia?" Always quick on her feet. Apologized and said we were looking for a friend's house and must have gotten the address wrong. Ryan smiled. "That's all right," he said. "Would you like to come in for a drink? My niece and her friends are here and they're about your age." We all looked at each other nervously. I was about to say no when the front door of the house opened and a girl stepped out. She looked exactly like me. I mean, exactly like me. It was like looking in a mirror. I heard Olivia gasp next to me. The girl, who must be Megan, squinted at the car. Then her eyes widened. She walked down the driveway slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal. When she reached the car, she just stared at me, her mouth open in shock. "You look just like me," she finally said. I nodded, unable to speak. "What's your name?" she asked. I told her. Her face went pale. "That's impossible," she whispered. "That's my name too." I felt like I was in a horror movie. This couldn't be happening. Ryan was looking between us, his expression confused, then thoughtful, then something else I couldn't read. He invited us inside more insistently. This time we went. What else could we do? The house was exactly as I'd imagined. Every detail the same. We sat in the living room with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. Ryan kept looking at his phone, texting someone while Megan and I just stared at each other, asking basic questions. Where were you born? When's your birthday? Who are your parents? We had different birthdays and were born in different states, but we were the same age. I told her I grew up in Seattle with my mom. My dad had died when I was a baby. She got very quiet then and looked at her uncle. Ryan put his phone down and looked at me, his expression serious. "Did your mother ever talk about your father?" He asked. "Not much." I said, "Just that he died in a car accident before I was born. She doesn't like to talk about it." Ryan and Megan exchanged a look that made my skin crawl. "What's going on?" I asked. Ryan took a deep breath and said he needed to make a phone call. He'd be right back when he left the room. Megan turned to me, her eyes intense. "Did your mom ever mention if your dad had a twin brother?" she asked. I tried to remember. "After my dad died, my mom had a falling out with his family. She never talked about them, I don't think." So I said, why? Megan looked like she was about to cry. "My dad had a twin brother," she said. "They had a huge fight when I was a baby and never spoke again. My dad told me his brother died in a car crash." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Olivia reached over and squeezed my hand, her face as shocked, as I felt Ryan came back into the room looking shaken. "I've just spoken to your mother," he said to Megan, "and she's confirmed what I suspected." He turned to me. "I need to call your mother now." "What's her number?" With trembling hands, I gave him my mom's cell number. He stepped out onto the deck to make the call. None of us spoke. The silence was deafening. 15 minutes later, Ryan came back inside. He sat down heavily on the couch and looked at me and Megan. "Your cousins," he said simply. "Your fathers were identical twins who had a terrible falling out. They both told their families that the other had died." My mind was spinning. I had family I never knew about. I had a cousin who looked exactly like me, who had the same name as me. Ryan explained that my father and Megan's father had been close until they both fell in love with the same woman, my mother. She'd chosen my father, and Megan's father had never forgiven him. They'd had such a bitter fight that they'd decided to completely cut each other out of their lives, even telling their families the other was dead. Ryan had respected his brother's wishes, but always felt uncomfortable with the lie. When he saw me today, he immediately suspected the truth. Our mothers confirmed it. Megan was crying now, and I realized I was too. Olivia put her arm around me, while Zach and his girlfriend sat in stunned silence. It turned out my father hadn't died in a car crash at all. He'd actually died of a heart attack when I was 3 months old. My mother had moved us to Seattle to start fresh and maintained the fiction that my father's family was gone. We stayed at Ryan's house until midnight, all of us talking and crying and trying to process this incredible revelation. Megan showed me pictures of her dad, my uncle, who was still alive and living in San Diego. Ryan called him and he cried when he heard about me, saying he'd always regretted the fight with his brother, but pride had kept him from reaching out. By the time we left, we'd made plans for me to meet my uncle the next day on the drive back to Santa Barbara. Olivia finally broke the silence, so she said, her voice shaky, "Your made-up Uncle Ryan with a beach house in Malibu turned out to be your actual Uncle Ryan with an actual beach house in Malibu." I shook my head in disbelief. "And your cousin has the same name as you and looks identical to you," she continued. "And all of this happened because I told one stupid lie." I said. The car was quiet for a moment. Then Zach started laughing from the back seat. "Sorry," he said when we all turned to look at him, "but this is the craziest thing I've ever heard." "What are the odds?" We all started laughing then, the tension breaking. I think I was in shock. The whole drive back the next day, Ryan drove Megan up to Santa Barbara to get me, and we went together to San Diego to meet my uncle. He looked so much like the few pictures I had of my dad that I broke down as soon as I saw him. He hugged me for a long time, telling me how sorry he was for everything I called my mom that night, and we had a long, difficult conversation. She admitted she'd known my uncle wasn't really dead, but she'd been so hurt by the brothers' fight and so grief-stricken after my dad died that she couldn't bear to reach out. We spent the rest of spring break getting to know our new family. Ryan invited us all to stay at his house in Malibu, and we had the most incredible week. Every night I would go to sleep thinking about how a lie I told, because I was embarrassed about being poor, had led me to discover my family when we returned to school. After break, I had to adjust to my new reality. I had an extended family now, cousins and an uncle who wanted to be part of my life. My mom started talking to my uncle again. Slowly rebuilding a relationship, Megan and I became close, texting daily and planning to spend the summer together. Olivia never let me forget that it was all because of my ridiculous lie. You made up a fake uncle named Ryan who had a beach house in Malibu, she would say, shaking her head, and the universe was like, actually, that's accurate. Sometimes the smallest lies have the biggest consequences. In my case, a lie told out of shame and insecurity led me to a truth I never could have imagined. I graduated that spring and got a job in San Diego to be closer to my new family. Olivia visits often and never lets me live down the fact that my lie turned out to be weirdly prophetic. My uncle jokes that I must have some kind of sixth sense. I don't know about that, but I do know I'll never forget the spring break that changed everything, when my small lie spiraled into a truth bigger than anything I could have imagined.